So, Nick, cash stuffing has gained a lot of traction on TikTok, social media over the past few months and has kind of become a viral trend. Talk to me a little bit about what it is.
So cash stuffing isn't actually a new concept, and it was around many, many years ago. I remember I'm 51 now, but when I was kind of growing up, that it was something that you'd hear people who would use literally envelopes to put money into every month to spend on things like groceries and utility bills and so on. And even though we've gone into this kind of digital age, it's now resurfaced and it's become hugely popular. And as you say, it's become like viral, gaining millions of views from people who are kind of the younger generation that are finding kind of the cost of living crisis the first time that their finances are really taking a little bit of a hit. And they're looking for ways in which to kind of budget more successfully. And this is certainly something that has really taken off.
And what are the benefits of using this method over any other kind of budgeting method?
The fact that people can visually see the money that they have available for certain things. Now, I personally think that there are probably some advantages, such as, for example, if you go out on a Friday evening with 50 euros in your wallet, you know exactly what you have to spend. And when you spend it, that's it, there's no more. Whereas we've gone into this kind of, I suppose, digital age of just tapping, and we all know that by doing that, you end up spending more than you probably had anticipated.
Definitely.
So yeah, so that's one of the really big advantages. And some people just like the visual kind of understanding. Like, for example, you budget for your groceries and you know what you should be spending. So you can see from that perspective why it's become something that has helped people. And like any financial tool, I mean, we've spoken recently about this zero-based budgeting, which is kind of you have a certain allocation and you reset every month. Cash stuffing is another kind of almost like, extension of that.
So, what exactly happens? Like, I mean, you come home at the, let's say, payday. Do you withdraw X amount of cash and put it into envelopes? Is that kind of the way it works? And how do you split the allocation between the different envelopes?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a kind of a teasing process where literally, you get paid on a sort of a 15th of the month and you go to the bank and you make a large withdrawal and put that money into those envelopes. Now, typically that's in its extreme form. I think that for me, because of the fact that many of us have kind of direct debits going out to pay for utilities, it would be quite extreme. But again, for some people, it works literally on the basis of every payment that they make is done in cash. So it's going a little bit back to the days of, and we've seen it happen in certain countries where there's been issues with online payments, which has caused this kind of slight fear almost. So whenever there are kind of concerns or indeed, kind of market downturns, people tend to go to more traditional methods as cash. But you allocate what you feel that you should be spending. So it's a great way of budgeting in that respect. If you say, well, I have 600 euros for this month for groceries, that's it. And if you end up underspending, you then can allocate it to another wallet, or indeed you can put it towards any future payments that you have.
And are there any kind of risks associated outside of the one that really stands out that you're withdrawing a large amount of cash? And obviously, having your money in bank accounts and being able to tap is a much kind of safer way, particularly for maybe the younger generation who are out and about and at risk of,
There's
the money
definitely
being stolen.
downsides. Yeah, sorry. So there's definitely downsides. I mean, for example, yes, there's a risk of theft, of course. If you've got money in different wallets at home, if you withdraw money and you carry it around with you. But also, you lose out on interest, obviously, albeit that we're in a low interest rate environment. You don't get any return on the money that you have because obviously it's in physical cash. And in addition, the fact is that because sometimes you do get certain rewards by having certain payments, many of those utility providers, if you have kind of online bills, typically you tend to get a bit of a saving. But some people find it difficult to budget, and especially with the cost of living crisis, it sometimes I feel could be a good kind of like almost like a kickstart. If you just
Mhm.
want to reset, you try it out for a couple of months, get into better habits, and then you can go back to, the more kind of, I suppose, normal methods.
Well, I think I can see the benefits and that it definitely stops that kind of online trolling through, I mean, we're constantly being hit with, marketing emails to buy, buy, buy. And, if you're that way inclined, you can end up overspending a lot in a month. So, and getting into debt quite easily. So, for people that are prone to getting into debt and overspending, I can definitely see the benefits. For somebody maybe that is more technologically focused or likes the kind of digital wallet, can they use the cash stuffing method in a digital form?
You can, and Revolut, who were really kind of, I suppose, the innovators in this area, who obviously came to the market about 2.5 years ago. Many of my clients that I speak to do use these wallets through Revolut, where they allocate certain amounts, and you can get interest, obviously, on monies that you leave in certain, places within that. Some people just like the physical form, and certainly, those that may be a little bit more traditional in their kind of thought process. But you'd be surprised. I was really surprised to hear that, the new generation, the Gen Zs, for example, they find it quite useful because they were never really kind of like used to that way of kind of budgeting, and impulse buying tends to be one of the biggest issues that I think a lot of us face for. Now, I do think that there's certain methods that people can use. I talk about the rule of 72. If you want to buy something online, for example, wait 72 hours, and if you still have that real desire or need, then okay, it's acceptable. But sometimes that might help. I mentioned there about obviously the zero-based budgeting method. But the key thing I think for most people is that we always say in Alpha Wealth, you really need to kind of do a kind of a snapshot once a year of what money's coming into your household and what you're spending. And in a way, cash stuffing almost forces that, So perhaps maybe doing it once, just understanding physically, because unless it's tangible, a lot of us don't really like things that are intangible. We don't sort of see the money we spend online because it's not really real. And it's the same for things like pension schemes. Many of us don't put enough attention to it because we don't see it. Whereas a property, for example, because it's bricks and mortar, we can understand it. We can go and test it for ourselves. So what I'd say is that depending on the individual that you are, and sometimes I talk to couples who are very different in their approach, and maybe there's that kind of middle ground of saying, okay, well, there's certain things that we may do. I actually think that, that sort of discretional spending, going to town on a Saturday with a certain amount of money in your pocket is probably not a bad idea.
So I was just going to say maybe that's where somebody could start with this kind of method is that, if you're looking at your overall spending, is there a recommended kind of amount of your salary for discretional spending? Could they focus on putting that into cash and seeing, how they get on for the month? Because it might be a method of saving in the long run.
Absolutely. And again, I use the mentality to help people achieve their financial objectives, obviously, depending on what they are and how long they're looking to achieve them over. And we talk about this concept of save first, spend later. And in a way, cash stuffing forces that. You allocate a certain amount that you want to save every month. That goes into obviously one of the
And what
envelopes.
would your recommended amount be of a gross salary, let's say?
Typically 20% of your total earnings or income into the household, in my opinion, should go towards savings. Now that can be, divided out between short, medium, and long term. And again, you need to be organized if you're going to use a cash stuffing method. It's quite time onerous, and that's something that some people may struggle with, but other people are more inclined to feel that they want to kind of keep reassessing this on a more regular basis. Um, the other thing then is that typically we talk about the 50-30-20 rule, which is that 50% of your overall income shouldn't exceed that number when it comes to necessary items like paying for rent or mortgage payments, certain costs, obviously, that you have to bear, insurance costs, for example, running a car, and so on. 30% then goes to those kind of items such as the, almost like discretionary spend, and then 20% obviously towards savings. And that's only a very crude kind of, I suppose, estimate. I always feel that depending on your situation, you need to be a bit adaptable. But certainly any form of being organized and trying to think about your savings is a good thing. I wouldn't see it as a negative. May not work for everybody, may seem a little bit extreme, but sometimes extreme methods can be very effective as well. And as I said, even if it's only used over a short period.
So to finish up, like what's the one practical tip that you would give to somebody maybe that is looking to budget a bit better?
There's some really good online tools. Now, again, this is a little bit against the grain of cash stuffing, but I think trying to kind of implement some form of hybrid might not be a bad idea. And we say to people, like, if you can do a financial budget once a year, even, it doesn't have to be done weekly, it doesn't have to be done, daily, but even once a year, and typically kind of coming towards year end, because we've got a lot of payments that go out. Christmas, for example, is a spend that many of us probably totally underestimate. And if you can budget for events that are coming up, people talk about this concept of like emergency funds, and I really don't like that. I say to people, but respectfully, there's no real emergency that requires a large amount of cash. Typically, that's why we pay for insurances, for example. What they probably mean is that there's an unplanned expense that they didn't anticipate. And what I say to them is, okay, well, if you can be a little bit ahead of the game and think about the next future spend, are you going to change a car within the next couple of years? You need to sort of make some countenance, because if that car is required, for example, you have a car that breaks down and you need to get it replaced, that can typically mean that you go to the bank and take out a loan, which is obviously the avoidance of what we're trying to help people with. Typically, we talk about this concept of financial independence, reaching that point where you have no loans, you've covered all future expenses, and you have this future income where it allows you that ability to decide, do you want to continue working, or certainly start to kind of, phase down in relation to, your kind of stressful working life. And I think cash stuffing has its place. For me personally, probably more in a kind of a digital environment rather than the physical cash.
So that was going to be my next question. Is cash stuffing a fad, or is cash still king?
Look, it became a fad in recent times because of this kind of TikTok internet kind of viral. I mean, one particular video got about 3 million views. So it gives you a sense of like how ingrained people can be and how much they follow this social media movement. But as I say, certain people, operate in certain ways. And I just think that as long as we can sort of try and manage our finances, whatever method we use is a positive for sure.
Brilliant. Well, I think there's a few little nuggets in there that we can probably all take as a little bit of advice in terms of helping us budget.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you.